Back here on Weather Command, 20 years ago, Hurricane Katrina brought devastation like this country had never seen. The Gulf Coast, specifically New Orleans, was underwater, and that water was not receding. New Orleans, as we know, sits below sea level, and as we also know, these levees failed and water rushed into the city. A crisis then unfolded in the Big Easy due to Katrina's rain and surge. It was a crisis that led to an all-hands-on-deck response. Among federal agencies that responded was the U.S. Coast Guard.
Joining us now this morning here on Weather Command is retired helicopter pilot for the U.S. Coast Guard, Brian Bailey. Brian, thank you for joining us as we reflect to 20 years ago, asking if you can take us back to the night of Hurricane Katrina and what that first call to action was like for you as you were working as a pilot.
Sure. I had just actually transferred here to the Aviation Training Center 2 weeks before Katrina hit. Previously, I was stationed up in Alaska doing rescues offshore to ships and fishing vessels. So the night of Katrina, I reported in to the unit about 9 o'clock that night after the storm had passed. And we were told to launch to New Orleans around Lake Pontchartrain on the lakefront. There were a couple of people stranded on a bridge. And so we launched about 11 o'clock at night. We got to New Orleans about midnight. One of our initial concerns was with all the power outages, the lit towers and everything was very dark. We found the people on the bridge stranded, and that's when we realized that a lot of New Orleans had been flooded. Up till then, it really wasn't reported of all the extensive flooding. So we started responding just house to house. We saw flashlights on just about every rooftop and started picking up people immediately that night.
And I mean, for perspective's sake, right, you're flying from above and you only have so much fuel. You remember that initial night? Were you in the sky all night? I would imagine, too, realizing in the moment that we can't land here in the city because it's underwater, essentially. You guys had to be pretty nimble and change on a dime. Were those changes you had to adjust, I would say, minute by minute as those rescues were being conducted?
Sure, that's something we monitored throughout the flight was our fuel state, knowing that the air station in New Orleans, the Coast Guard air station, was closed because they had been devastated by the storm. We had 6 hours of fuel on board, so we have extended fuel tanks. We can stay in the air quite a while. But we ended up finding an airport west of New Orleans in Homa Terrebonne that was still open and was willing to refuel us. So we landed there about 3 in the morning and refueled, and we're able to work another 6 hours. So they gave us about 12 hours of on-scene time in New Orleans before we returned to Mobile to return the aircraft to another crew that was waiting to take our place.
And did it feel overwhelming? I'm sure once especially daylight was over the city, because without power, you couldn't really see the full scope, but to notice house after house that was inundated up to the roof with water and people waiting to be rescued, it was so critical to get that air support in. And within the days leading, I guess, following, hundreds of people, if not more than that, were rescued by you guys. Are there any stories that do stand out, getting people out of their homes?
So the first night and the first couple of days, it was not hard to find people. They were on just about every rooftop. And so it was easy pickings. It was probably day 3 and 4 where we're searching neighborhoods that were flooded and had been flooded since the hurricane had passed. And one of the ones that stood out, we were searching a neighborhood and we thought we had cleared the whole block of houses. There was nobody left to rescue. And we started departing the scene. And one of our crew members said, "Hey, I think I saw something back there." So we turned back around, and in the roof of this house, maybe a 6-inch hole. And in that, coming out of that hole was a stick with a Doritos bag kind of waving. And he said, "Hey, I think that's somebody." So we deployed the rescue swimmer who went down with the axe, cut a hole in the roof, and sure enough, there was a family in there who'd been trapped for 4 days waiting for rescue. If our crew member hadn't seen that one little bag waving in the breeze, then they probably would have been stuck there a lot longer. As a matter of fact, while we were conducting that rescue, we deployed the rescue swimmer, we patrolled the rest of the neighborhood and found 2 more people who had heard us and come out into the flooded streets and were hanging on and treading water. And we ended up rescuing them while we waited for the rescue swimmer to get those other people out of their attic.
It's harrowing, Brian. I mean, a Doritos bag that quite literally could have saved those people's lives. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's often overlooked, but you had mentioned it previously, it was hot in New Orleans. So we're dealing with a city that had no power. Those warm temperatures were affecting people. So those in the attic could have perhaps suffered from heat exhaustion, yeah?
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's the last thing you want to do in the South in the summertime is get in your attic. And that's where those people were staying to, evade the floodwaters. And that was one of our biggest concerns in the days after when we'd pick up somebody. We carried a lot of bottled waters with us because dehydration, especially of elderly and children, was one of our main concerns and who we wanted to get back to safety as soon as possible.
Yeah, and that became the story, right? The days following landfall from Hurricane Katrina and how people were suffering. It was hot, it was humid, it was oppressive, they were trapped. I mean, and the lives you saved by doing those constant rotations around the city. Well, we appreciate you reflecting, and a lot of people are reflecting on what played out 20 years ago in New Orleans and out of Louisiana and even into Mississippi. But thank you for joining us here on Weather Command. Retired helicopter pilot with the U.S. Coast Guard, Brian Bailey. Thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And what a trip, right, from Alaska all the way down to Louisiana.
Yeah.
A programming note, too, as we continue to look back on Hurricane Katrina and its lasting impacts along the Gulf Coast. Tonight at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, Part 3 of our docuseries, Katrina's Wrath 20 Years Later, will air. Tonight's episode is called The Experts. Among the vulnerabilities exposed by Katrina were flaws to infrastructure. And since Katrina's landfall, there have been changes. Big changes like flood walls that protect the city of New Orleans from a 25-foot storm surge. Tune in, or you can set your DVR tonight, 8:30 Eastern, right here on Fox Weather.